And the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire upon the altar, and lay the wood in order upon the fire. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall lay the parts, the head, and the fat in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But his inwards and his legs shall he wash in water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar, to be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savour unto the Lord. And if his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep, or of the goats, for a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish, and he shall kill it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall sprinkle his blood round about upon the altar. And he shall cut it into his pieces, with his head and his fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire which is upon the altar. But he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it upon the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savour unto the Lord. And if the burnt sacrifice for his offering to the Lord be of fowls, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. And the priest shall bring it unto the altar, and bring off his head, and burn it on the altar. And the blood therefore shall be wrung out at the side of the altar. And he shall pluck away his crop with his feathers, and cast it beside the altar on the east part, by the place of the ashes. And he shall cleave it with the wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savour unto the Lord.
Thanks, Alex. I'm now going to ask James to come forward and to begin a series of studies on offerings of the Lord. Thanks.
Thanks, Uncle Kev, and good evening, everyone. We come to what I find to be one of the most fascinating aspects of the Bible. A study of how God preached what his Son would be like to the people in the Old Testament. How would God reveal to his chosen people what their Messiah would be without actually telling them? To show to them what they would need to look for. To show them the shadow of the good things to come. And so in studying the law, what we want to do is to, in particular the 6 altar offerings as they're called, we want to take a look at what Christ would have to be like, what the perspective of the law was, to say this is who the Messiah will be. And I think when we come to think about the law, we're often coloured, our perspective is often coloured by a New Testament perspective. We often think of law and grace in opposition to each other. That we're not the arguments of the New Testament, Galatians and Hebrews and Romans and other places, the argument is don't go back to the law, don't go and follow the law, don't go and do the works of the law, that's not going to help you. And so we can sort of lose perspective on the value of the teachings that were contained in it. In Galatians 3, verse 24, the Apostle Paul writes there, "So then the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith." So the law was the one to watch over us. The Greek word is one of the same root as pedagogue. It's the idea of a teacher. And the pedagogue was a slave who belonged to the house of the father. And he would have charge over the child. Make sure the child went to their lessons. Make sure the child went to the athletic training or military training that they were supposed to go to. It was the pedagogue who had charge over the child. But the pedagogue was not the father. He was there with the father's authority to teach the child, but was not, or to ensure that the child was taught, but was not the father himself. And in 1 Corinthians, when Paul's talking about all the different people in the ecclesia, all the different people who are interacting with the Corinthians, he says there, you've had many guides, but not many fathers. And it's the same word there for guides. It's these instructors that they're in place of someone else. They're there in place of God, or they're there in place of the father figure to ensure that the children would be instructed. And if we come to Romans 7, Romans 7 verse 10 to 13, we see another perspective on the law. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin producing death. It was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. And so the law here is portrayed as good. And the good where we do not measure up. And so the law that the messenger teach is holy, it is just, and it is good. It is there for our benefit. It can teach us lessons, and it can reveal to us the mind of God as He taught His people in the Old Testament. So we'll come back to Leviticus now and consider these offerings. There's 6 offerings that fall under the category of altar offerings. They're used in different ways and in different forms, but there's 6 basic offerings. There's the sin offering, which teaches the need for forgiveness. There's the trespass offering, which teaches of our need for retribution, for paying back wrongs done. There's the burnt offering, which we'll be considering tonight, which speaks of dedication and giving ourselves completely to God. There's the peace offering, which speaks of fellowship. And finally, there's the grain and drink offering, which were offered as complementary offerings to the other offerings. But you'll notice here that when we come to chapter 1 of Leviticus, we're looking at the burnt offering. And the reason why that's interesting is that the burnt offering wasn't the first offering given. Before one could offer the burnt offering, you would have to offer the sin offering. There was no good coming to God offering to dedicate yourself to Him until you had sought forgiveness and were right in the eyes of God. So we come across to chapter 5. So we see that this order of offerings is clearly laid out in the law. So Leviticus 5, and again at verse 7. But if he cannot afford a lamb, then he shall bring to Yahweh as his compensation for the sin that he has committed 2 turtle doves or two pigeons, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. He shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer first the one for the sin offering. He shall wring its head from its neck, but shall not sever it completely. And he shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, with the rest of the blood shall be drained at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. Then he shall offer the second for a burnt offering, according to the rule. So the rule is first the sin offering, then the burnt offering. And over in Numbers chapter 6, we have that reiterated for us with the law concerning the Nazirite vow. When that was completed, again we have, so Numbers chapter 6 and verse
14, and he shall bring his gift to Yahweh, one male lamb a year old without blemish for a burnt offering, and one ewe lamb a year old without blemish for a sin offering, and one ram without blemish for a peace offering. So these are the offerings he has to bring. But then how are they given? Verse 16, and the priest shall bring them before Yahweh and offer his sin offering and his burnt offering, and he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice for a peace offering to Yahweh. And so this is put forward as the right order for the offerings to be given in. First the sin, then the burnt, then the peace. And they're consistently in that order. And if we come to Psalm 51, in Psalm 51 we have David expressing this thought to us. If we consider where David is at this point in his life, he is mired in sin, beyond hope of help from the law. There's no offering he can give. There's nothing he can do that is going to allow him a path back to God under the law. But he calls on God to have mercy on him anyway. Verse 1. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. He's asking God to cleanse him. He's asking God for forgiveness and for mercy. And having asked for this throughout the psalm, we come to verse 16, where he says there, for you would not delight in sacrifice, or else I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. So because there's no sin offering that David can offer, there's no way he is able to come to God to offer a burnt offering. He is held outside of the scope of the law. But verse 18, he says, do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. So when God is once again working in Jerusalem, I believe this is David looking forward to the kingdom age, when God will build up Jerusalem, and God will do his good pleasure within Jerusalem. He says there, then you will delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings, then bulls will be offered upon your altar. And so it's only once David is in a forgiven state that he is going to be able to offer whole burnt offerings appropriately to God. And so, well, why then, if this is the principle of the order of the offerings, that first we have to have a sin offering, first forgiveness has to be sought before it can be appropriate for us to offer a burnt offering. If that's the case, why did God, when he opened up the book of Leviticus, open it up and go, when you're going to come and offer an offering, offer a burnt offering. And then gets through all the other ones and then goes sin and trespass at the end. Well, if we come back to Galatians 3, we need to think about why and how the law was given in the first place. The law as a whole wasn't there because that was God's final plan. We see here, so he says there, Galatians 3, and he's talking about how the promise has been given. Verse 18, for if the inheritance comes by law, it no longer comes by promise. But God gave it to Abraham by promise. So our salvation is coming by way of promise through faith. Verse 19. Why then the law? So that's the question I asked, and that's the question we come to. So why was the law given then? It was added because of transgressions until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made. And it was put in place through angels by an intermediary. So the law was given to Moses because of sin. So it's because of sin that the law is given. So, but the law being perfect, just and good, is putting forward the ideal. It's putting forward, when the law opens up, I believe, it's opening up and saying, we want dedication to God, we want fellowship with God, that's what we're looking for, and to get there we're going to have to deal with the sin offering after that. But the focus of the law, what the law was getting at, what the law was trying to do, was to get us to think about how we would dedicate ourselves to God, and how we would, as thinking of ourselves as Jews in the Old Testament time, how we would have fellowship with God. And as evidence for this, I just want to stop in Ezekiel on our way back to Leviticus. In Ezekiel 46, we have a vision of the future. And here we have the Prince, Christ himself, in the temple in the future age. And we see there, verse 2, the Prince shall enter by the vestibule of the gate from the outside, and shall take his stand at the post of the gate. The priest shall offer his burnt offering and his peace offering, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Christ here is offering still offerings of burnt offering, offering of peace offering. In the kingdom age, it's still right for Christ to be declaring that it's right to be dedicated to God. Still offering offerings that say he is in fellowship with his God. But there's no mention of a sin offering that Christ offers in the kingdom. We have it emphasised again down in verse 12. When the prince provides a freewill offering, either a burnt offering or a peace offering as a freewill offering to Yahweh, the gate facing east shall be opened for him. So we have Christ offering burnt offerings and peace offerings. This is what the law should have been focused on. But we have still, with the mortal people in the land in the kingdom age, there's still going to be sin offerings offered on their behalf, so that they may learn the lessons of that, as we have verse 20. And he said to me, this is the place where the priest shall boil the guilt offerings and the sin offerings, and when they shall bake the grain offerings in order not to bring them to the outer court, and so transmit holiness to the people. So there is sin offerings being made in the kingdom on behalf of the people, but for Christ in his perfect state, he is only offering burnt offerings and peace offerings. And so I think that is an important emphasis in terms of perspective on the law that is given in the ordering of them. And so we come finally to the offerings themselves. And as a summary of the offerings, I've got this book here by Brother Barling, and he puts it better than I could, so I'll put it as he puts it. So we've got our 6 offerings, and why do we have the 6 offerings? What are these 6 offerings given together? Why do we have them? What's the purpose of all of them? And he writes, there were, as we have seen, 6 altar offerings in all, each differing in complexion and in meaning from the others. Why were there so many? Simply because no fewer would have sufficed. As no one symbol on its own could possibly have been versatile enough, it was needed that number to teach all the lessons by which the ritual of sacrifice was intended to convey. In brief, going on further down, in brief, none of the altar offerings was sufficient in itself. So the law overcame this limitation by delegating to each of them a special primary function. This enabled each one to help make good the deficiencies of the others, with the result that all, in the aggregate, taught the etiquette of sacrificial worship in its completeness. So all of the offerings working together would teach how we should come to God as a whole. And finally, we see, therefore, that though no given symbol was able to present all the aspects of worship simultaneously and with the same degree of potency, yet all the symbols together ensured that no truth was either left unmentioned or insufficiently stressed. And so we have 6 offerings working in tandem, all working together to show the whole teaching of the law. And so we come to the burnt offering, our chapter tonight. And as we've said, the burnt offering was for the purpose of, or was to teach the message of dedicating ourselves to God. And hopefully by going through tonight we'll see how that is the case. So the word burnt there is the word olah, and it means to ascend. The focus of the burnt offering was about the entire offering, the whole burnt offering, to be placed on the altar, for all of it to be burnt, and in the smoke to ascend to God. So the whole portion of the offering is going up to God. No part of it, with one exception, is to be left on earth, so to speak. The whole portion of the offering is going up to God. And we see there in verse 9 that this is brought out. But its entrails and its legs he shall wash with water, and the priest shall burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to Yahweh. Now, we have there, so the King James has for that, I'm working from the ESV, the King James has that in verse 9, and the priest shall burn all on the altar to be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire of a sweet savour unto Yahweh. Now, I was in two minds on whether or not to discuss this exact point, because in one hand it doesn't really matter, but it is a phrase that comes up time and time again when you're reading this. It comes up time and again that this is an offering either made by fire or a burnt offering, a food offering, pleasing to Yahweh. And the issue we have is that this word doesn't appear anywhere else or in any other context other than how it's translated here. So in reality, the translators have had to guess as to what the word could mean from what it sounds like. So it is a particularly difficult word to translate. The New English translation, the translators of that have translated it as a gift. The ESV and others have chosen to use as a food offering, and the King James and others again say that it is an offering made by fire. Now, it is definitely true that this offering, in this case, is made with the use of fire. So there's no real problem there. But the reason why I believe that either calling it a gift or a food offering is of benefit is if we just come across to Leviticus 24. So this is speaking of the table of showbread and the bread that is on it. Verse 8 there says, every Sabbath day Aaron shall arrange it before Yahweh regularly. It is for the people of Israel as a covenant forever. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in the holy place, since it is for him a most holy portion out of Yahweh's food offerings. So where it's got there for food offerings in the ESV, that's the same word as we've got as a offering made by fire unto Yahweh from back in chapter 1. And we see there that clearly in this instance, what's being talked about is bread that is being given, that is provided for Aaron and his sons to eat in the holy place. So it's clearly food in that instance. And that's the only real clear case we have of what it is. But then when we step back and we think about the offerings as a whole and how they work, is throughout all of the offerings, we keep coming up with this particular offering, so much of it, this part of it could be eaten by this person in this circumstance, and this part of the offering could be eaten by that person in that circumstance, and this part of the offering is to be given to God as food for him. So I think then with different portions of the offerings across all of the offerings being apportioned out in different ways and given to different people or to God for them, the understanding of that phrase there to be as a food offering fits with the image that's been given to us across all of the offerings. So a bit of an aside, but I think it's actually important to sort of get that perspective on what these offerings are actually talking about. And so with that being the case, that this offering, the burnt offering, is placed on the altar and it's entirely burnt, the whole portion of it is going up to God in complete dedication to Him. We then step back and see how this offering was put together. And so first of all, back in verse 2, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to Yahweh, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herds or from the flock. Now there's a principle here that's being established that the offerings that were given had to cost the offerer something. They couldn't just go and get a clean animal, so they couldn't just go out and get a deer, which was perfectly fine for them to eat, catch it and go, right, here you go, God, here's my offering. No, it had to be an animal that they farmed. It had to be something that they had put time and effort into, something that they had spent money on or put value into. And so they bring this thing that they've got value into. In verse 3, if his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall bring a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before Yahweh. And so this man comes and he brings his offering. In this case, it's a bullock, as we have down there in verse 5. So he brings this bull in and he brings it in, and we think it has to be without blemish. Now, if you're a farmer, Uncle Brian might know more about this than I do, but if you're a farmer and you've got your herd of cows there, and you've got your best, or you've got a perfect condition male bull, that's the one you want to keep, so that the next generation of your cows down are going to be from that farm. This was a perfect one. This one's in perfect condition, but you have to take that down and you have to bring that to the tabernacle. This thing that could be of such value to you as a farmer, as someone who relied on these animals to support your family. You needed these, and yet you had to bring a perfect one for this offering. And so we have there that he shall lay his hand, verse 4, he shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make an atonement for him. Then he shall kill the bull before Yahweh, and Aaron's sons the priest shall bring the blood and throw the blood against the sides of the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And so there is a perspective of this offering in which it is to provide atonement. But that's not the focus of the offering. That principle is still there in the offering. Yes, the death occurred. Yes, the blood's there for that. But it's not the focus. When we come to the sin offering in 2 Wednesday night classes of this series time, 6 weeks, whatever, 5 weeks, whatever it is, when we look at the sin offering, we'll see there that in the sin offering, the blood's going all over the place. It's being used in different ways, and the focus of that offering is on the blood. Whereas this offering, yes, the blood's there, but it's not the focus of the offering. It's just placed down, it's thrown at the side of the altar. And so, but we note there in verse 5 that it's Aaron's sons that bring the blood. So through this offering, we come up with this interesting idea that the offerer prepares the offering, but it can only be presented to God by the priest. And so we get the idea of an intermediary. The offerer couldn't come, no matter how good his offering was, the offerer couldn't put it on the altar. He killed it, but then the blood's taken by the priest and placed on the altar. Then he goes, and later on, verse 6, he shall flay, so that's then the offerer, then he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it to pieces, and the son, so he goes and does that. But then verse 7, the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and arrange the wood on the fire, and Aaron's sons the priest shall arrange the pieces, the head, the fat, on the wood that is on the altar. So the offerer brings the offering, kills the offering, and prepares the offering, but in everything that happens to bring that offering to God is done through the priest. It's the priest's role and the priest's duty to do that. And so we see there that the offering has to be, this is back in verse 6, then he shall flay the burnt offering and cut it into pieces. And so we've seen that this offering has to be, from back in verse 3, this offering has to be without blemish. And the extent to which this has to be without blemish is this man has to come and he has to sit down, the animal's been killed, he sits down and he cuts away this animal, cuts it into pieces, searching through the carcass of this animal, looking for fault. Because if it's got a fault in it, as we read in Leviticus 22, we won't turn there for the sake of time, but if this animal's got a fault, it can't be used in the offering. So you just imagine, and this is just purely thinking about the sort of mechanics of going about this, is this person's come, imagine we're in the land of Israel, this person's walked for 2 or 3 days with all the animals that they think they need for the offering. Sort of get an image of this in 1 Samuel 1, where Hannah brings a bull to the court. We've got this image of this person coming down, they've got the animals they think they're going to need for it, and they have to butcher this whole cow in pieces in the tabernacle precincts somewhere, looking for a fault in it, trying to find a fault in it. And if it's got a fault in it, it's not going to be any good. And this would have taken hours. I've seen estimates of people sort of saying, I just looked up how long does it take to butcher a cow. People were saying, if you're doing it by yourself and you've got basic, chainsaws and bandsaws, well, you might be able to get it done in 3 to 4 hours if you've got a few people to help. This is people doing it by hand, pulling this thing apart, looking for the faults in it. And you just imagine the cost and the effort and the time that it took to meditate on how their life was perfect. As they cut into this animal going, this is meant to be representing me. This is meant to be my perfect dedication to God. How perfect do I need to be? And what would happen then if you find there's some fault hidden away on the inside of the animal? Everything you've done to that point is of no value. The whole lot has to be scrapped, and I'm sorry, but come again tomorrow. That would have been truly devastating. Truly devastating for the person who thought they were ready to offer this offering of dedication to God, but they weren't there yet. They had to go away, go and find another bull without blemish, one that was perfect. Find another one. Go through the whole process again. And I think the whole purpose of this, of saying this has to be without blemish, is that as much as we have to dedicate our lives to God, we can't dedicate our faults to Him. We can't dedicate our failings to God, the things that we don't do right, the things that we don't do well. We can't say, here you go, God, accept this thing that I'm doing wrong. You have to accept it. I've dedicated my life to you. You have to accept me for the good and the bad. No, if there's fault there, it needs to be cut out. That fault can't be there. The offering has to start all over again. And so we see then, going down in the rest of the chapter, in verse 10 to verse 13, there is a repeat of the offering given again in exactly the same way, if it's a sheep or if it's a goat. So they're exactly the same. But down in verse 14, we see there, if his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or pigeons. And so this offerer, for whatever reason, was able to bring this such a meagre offering. You imagine if there's someone else there in the tabernacle precincts, in the temple, sorting through this whole bull, trying to find fault, trying to work out what's going on in it, and this other person comes in with just a pigeon. And this is again where we can sort of see where we've got the ideal forms in the law and that which is done for practical reasons. That the law accepts that not everything is going to be perfect. And so with the burnt offering of the bird, we notice that the priest has a lot more to do. So verse 15, the priest shall bring it to the altar and wring off its head and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. And he shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it beside the altar on the east side, in the place for ashes. He shall tear open its wings, but shall not sever it completely. So it is the priest who does all of this. And we know it's noted here in this chapter that he removes the feathers. And this was actually done with the skin as well. And the reference for that is, I'll just turn there, 7 verse 8. So Leviticus 7 verse 8, that in the same way that for this small version of the offering, the feathers are removed, on the whole burnt offering of the bull or the sheep or the goat, the skin is removed. And I think this is a really important lesson that the law is bringing out, that the skin there, the external covering, plays no part in the dedication to God. We see there, 7 verse 8, and the priest who offers any man's burnt offering shall have for himself the skin of the burnt offering that he has offered. So in other offerings, the skin is burnt. So with the sin offering, for example, the skin is burnt along with everything else outside the camp. It maintains its position with the offered elements. But here, in an offering where everything is to be given to God, an exception is made for the skin, which is given to the priest. And the emphasis there is, and the priest who offers any man's burnt offering shall have for himself the skin. So everything is given to God, but the skin can be taken by the priest. It plays no part within the offering itself. The external covering plays no part in the dedication to God. And so coming back to chapter 1, we see there that so we've got this turtle dove or this pigeon being offered, where the priest has far more involvement in it. And I was reminded, thinking about this afternoon, as I was sort of trying to pull my final thoughts together, of the parable of the talents. Now you've got this person here who doesn't have as much, they can't do as much, and so to whom much is given, much is expected, and to whom little is given, less is expected. And so we have here this person who can only, in their offering of dedication and service to God, they can only offer a pigeon. And so for them, the priest comes alongside and does so much more for them. It's the priest who kills it. It's the priest who wrings off its head and drains the blood and does the whole lot for them. But at the end of each of these offerings, we have, verse 9, and the priest shall burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to Yahweh. Verse 13, and the priest shall offer all of it and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to Yahweh. Verse 17, and the priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to Yahweh. No matter what level of offering the offerer was able to give, it had the same effect and the same result with God. It was a food offering with a pleasant aroma to Him. So no matter what offering could be given, if it was given sincerely, if it was without blemish, if it followed all of those criteria, God would have the same response to it. I want to take a look now. So that is the general burnt offering in place. We want to take a look at the daily burnt offering, because the burnt offering was one that was burnt every day. So it was actually burnt twice a day on behalf of the nation as a whole. So if we come across to Numbers chapter 28. So, Numbers 28, verse 1, Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, command the people of Israel, and say to them, my offering, my food, for my food offerings, my pleasant aroma, you shall be careful to offer to me at its appointed time. And you shall say to them, this is the food offering that you shall offer to Yahweh, 2 male lambs, a year old, without blemish, day by day, as a regular offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And then goes on to speak about the drink offerings and the grain offerings, or the meal offerings, that would be offered alongside them. And so this was to happen every day. This was there morning and evening, constantly, the continual whole burnt offering that dedicated Israel as a nation to their God. But what is really fascinating is we then go through the rest of chapter 28 and chapter 29, through a whole series of their feasts and festivals that they had to have. And with each of them, there is an emphasis made that no matter what happened, they had to continue offering the daily burnt offerings. So we have there, verse 9, on the Sabbath day, 2 male lambs a year old. Verse 10, this is the burnt offering of every Sabbath day, beside the regular burnt offerings, that's drink offerings. So on the Sabbath day, there was going to be a double amount of regular burnt offerings. We then come down to the offerings that were done at the beginning of months, verse 11. And at the beginning of the months you shall offer a burnt offering to Yahweh, and go through that whole series there. Verse 15, and it shall be offered beside the regular burnt offering and its drink offering. And so for every single one of these, and we get it possibly most clearly in the offerings of the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles over in chapter 29, where it comes through at the end of every day in that series, that this is done beside the regular burnt offering, beside the regular burnt offering. So we have that there in verse 16, in verse 19, in verse 22, in verse 25, in verse 28, in verse 31, in verse 34, in verse 38, in verse 39. And there's some other ones in between that I haven't pointed out. But throughout this whole section, time and time again, there's your burnt offering of dedication, and everything else, all the other foods, all the other things that go along, are over and above that. It would have been, if we were writing and sort of trying to conserve space, we would have just got to the end of, verse 8 and gone, okay, this is the daily burnt offering, and you could have just written in one verse, if other offerings are to be offered on this day, you still need to offer the daily burnt offerings. But no, it's every single other offering that comes through this whole series. At the end of every one, you still have to offer the daily burnt offerings. And I think the lesson of this is that when we put that dedication in, if we put that commitment to God to say, we're going to do this, this is our minimum effort. This is the minimum of the things that we're going to do. We need to stick to that. And this was the lesson to the people of Israel. They had to be dedicated to God. This was the minimum offering they would be offering on that day, that there would be the regular daily burnt offering, and that anything else was over and above that. That they couldn't just go, I'm busy doing this thing for you, I don't have to be dedicated to you, or I've got this other thing going on, I can't be doing that. No matter what, there was a continual daily burnt offering of dedication throughout. And this is picked up in Daniel 11, where it's the taking away of the daily burnt offering that is the sign for what would be the abomination of desolations. It was the removal of this offering that was continued day after day, every morning, every night, every morning, every night. This lamb was constantly burning there, constantly there as a sign of the nation's dedication to their God. And so what then is the lesson of the burnt offering for us? Because I think it's important to bring this back to our lives. So I want to go through a few passages in the New Testament where the ideas of the burnt offering are pulled out and expounded on in the New Testament. And the first of these is in Mark chapter 12. In Mark 12 we have the question asked of Christ as to what is the greatest commandment of all. And in verse 29 Jesus answered, the most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, that you shall love your neighbour as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said to him, You are right, teacher, for you have truly said that he is one, and there is no other beside him, and to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbour as oneself is much more than whole burnt offerings and sacrifice. And so for us, what we can do in loving our God, in loving our brothers and sisters, in serving them, in serving our neighbours, is more than all of the whole burnt offerings and sacrifice. More than the daily burnt offerings that went on day after day, every morning, every night. If we dedicate ourselves to the care and the love of our ecclesia, if we look after them, that is much more to God than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And it's placed on the level of the greatest commandment of all. If we come across to Romans chapter 12. In Romans chapter 12, we again pick up on the idea of a daily burnt offering. So Romans 12 verse 1, Paul here writes, I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable worship. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And so that we need to live our lives being given completely. We can't give part of our body to God and hold the rest back. We give our whole selves to God as a living sacrifice, and that it needs to be renewed. So as we see the daily burnt offering smouldering away, the last ashes falling through the grate, there's another one being prepared and placed on beside it, ready to go again for the next period. And so for ourselves, we need to make sure that we're renewing our offering, we're renewing our dedication to God day by day, that we may find what is good and what is acceptable with Him. And finally, in Hebrews 4, we have possibly the greatest exposition of the offering of the burnt offering. These are words I'm sure are very familiar to us. Let us strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and spirit, to the joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from His sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. And so this has the image, I truly believe, of that individual there, with the knife out, going through their offering. All of the filth getting cleaned out, trying to sort out, is my offering perfect? Is what I'm giving to God, is it perfect? And we're told here, well, there's the warning, verse 11, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. So we don't want to be doing that. And he says, well, what we should be doing is we should be taking God's word and allowing that to cut us to our very core, to find those blemishes, to find those faults, to find that corruption. And we're left in verse 13, where no creature is hidden from His sight, but are all naked and exposed to the eyes of Him on whom we must give account. We're flayed out before Him, cut open. He can see every part of us. But then He lifts us back up. Verse 14. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathise with our weaknesses, but with one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. And so we have a high priest who can come alongside, who can help us to cut out those pieces of corruption and blemish that need to be cut out. but he is there. Because we read in verse 16, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." So that with Christ alongside us, we can have the strength to cut out those faults, to be unblemished, and to be able to present ourselves in perfect dedication to our God.
Thank you, James, for presenting to us the elements of the burnt offering and the importance of that offering in relation to our own dedication to the things of God. In conclusion, there you mentioned about presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice, not to be conformed to this world, but to be transformed. And the spirit of the continual burnt offering is no doubt picked up by the Apostle Paul when he says, "Let us go forth, therefore, unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. For here have we no continuing city, but we seek one to come. By him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But to do good and to communicate, forget not, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased." So thank you, James, for that night. Very interesting. And we now ask Dave, I think you're doing the announcements.
Thanks, Brother James, and as we say, look forward to in a fortnight's time to continuing on. So next class 1 is next week on September 30th, and Brother Tim Penn is to lead that night on the 1st of Peter chapter 3. So God willing, this week we have Suburban Young People meeting on Saturday, and that's a split one in between Cumberland and Enfield, which needs to be registered for. And it brings us to the weekend, so most of us are away. And there's no Sunday school in the morning, and Brother Gary Penn is exhorting, Brother Peter Pullman's presiding, reads to be organised, and in the evening Brother Josh Jurgens is to give the talk. Thank you.
We'll bring then our evening to the conclusion by singing together hymn 223. hallowed be thy great and thy holy name. For thou art able to lay each one of us open, able to see the innermost thoughts and intents of our heart. Nothing is hid from thine eyes. And so, Father, we pray that though we be sinners, and though our flesh be corrupt, yet, Father, we know that thy mercy is towards those who know and love thee. And so it is our prayer that thou would wash us clean. For we know that through thy Son he is able to present us faultless before thy throne. We know, Father, that thou art merciful and gracious and long-suffering, and that thy mercy is toward those who know and who love thee and who walk in thy ways. And so, gracious Father, each one of us desire that thou would hedge us about in these difficult days, that thou would cause us to be alive to those things which would return us to the dust. May, O Father, thy forgiveness be nigh to each one of us as we would journey this road. May thy kingdom come. May that day soon dawn, O Father, when by grace our natures shall be changed. When we stand before all the judge of the earth, might thy mercy be upon each one of us. Hedge us about then as we go from this place. Be with others of like precious faith. Be with those, Father, who experienced in the tribulations of life, whatever the form they may take. We thank thee now, Father, for refreshments. We thank thee for all thy mercies so liberally bestowed upon us day by day. And so we would approach unto thee knowing that at thy right hand we have one who is able to be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. Through him we approach thee now. Amen.